Aside from being a drama addict, which is probably obvious if you've seen literally any of my videos, there's another genre I absolutely love, horror, which is honestly kind of ridiculous because horror movies do not love me back. Every time I watch one, I end up losing sleep, jumping at random noises and promising myself that I'll never watch horror again. You know it's bad when the pile of clothes on the chair suddenly starts looking suspicious. You'd think after enough sleepless nights I'd learn my lesson. But no. Every few weeks, I convince myself that I'm done with horror movies. And every few weeks, I end up watching another one anyway, which is exactly how I ended up falling in love with Japanese horror, especially the low-budget movies. Because Japan makes the kind of movies that sound completely made up. They've got a movie about a girl with a machine gun for a hand. They've got a movie about killer sushi, not a killer chef, not a cursed restaurant. The sushi itself is doing the killing. So naturally, you'd expect Japanese horror to be equally unhinged. You'd expect ghosts doing backflips through windows and jump scares every 30 seconds. But it's actually the opposite. Instead of throwing things at your face, it slowly gets under your skin and makes you uncomfortable for 2 hours straight. Most Japanese horror movies are slow, atmospheric, and deeply unsettling. They just fill you with a sense of dread and let your imagination do the rest. The characters are usually quiet, ordinary people too, which makes everything feel even more real. I grew up watching Hollywood horror movies. Some are great, some are genuinely creepy, but they aren't as scary as Asian horror movies. That's a different beast entirely. One horror movie scene that still randomly pops into my head when I'm trying to sleep is from Pulse. If you've seen the movie, you probably already know exactly which scene I'm talking about. And since I've already been traumatized by it, it is my honor to pass on that trauma to you. See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. No loud music, no jump scare, no ghost suddenly flying at the camera. It's literally just a person walking, and yet my brain looked at that scene and went, yep, we're keeping that forever. Asian horror doesn't just scare you with jump scares, it plants an idea in your head and lets your brain do the rest. So, if you're looking to get into Japanese horror or you're just in the mood to ruin your sleep schedule for a few days, here are the Japanese horror movies I think everyone should watch at least once. Ringu. If you've ever seen a creepy girl crawling out of a TV, this is where it all started. The American remake, The Ring, is one of the few horror remakes that's actually really good. Usually horror remakes make me appreciate the original more, but this is one of those rare cases where both versions are worth watching. One Missed Call, a movie that made me suspicious of my phone. The less you know going in, the better. Reincarnation. If you like psychological horror that slowly gets under your skin, definitely give this one a shot. Dark Water. Proof that a leaking ceiling can somehow be terrifying. It's more emotional than most horror movies, but it's incredibly effective. Ju-on, The Grudge. Not just the movies, the entire franchise. These films are basically a masterclass in making ordinary places feel cursed forever. The Forest. Okay, this one technically isn't a Japanese movie, but it's set in Japan's infamous Aokigahara Forest, which is already a terrifying location before the horror stuff even starts. The setting is creepy, and this forest is such an unsettling location that the movie gets a lot of mileage out of the setting. I hardly ever see people talk about this one anymore, which is a shame because I think it's a pretty underrated watch. Audition. This one starts off feeling like a completely different movie before taking a very dark turn. Go in blind if you can. Three Extremes, an anthology from three of Asia's biggest directors. I genuinely enjoyed all three stories, but Dumplings was easily my favorite. And yes, it is exactly as disturbing as everyone says it is. Confessions. Not traditional horror, but one of the most unsettling movies I've ever watched. It's psychological, emotional, and absolutely devastating. Tag. I know this movie isn't everyone's cup of tea, but for some reason it really got under my skin. The plot is completely ridiculous at times, and there were definitely moments where I was sitting there thinking, what on earth am I watching? Despite all that, the movie filled me with this constant sense of dread and unease. I can't even fully explain why. There's just something about it that felt deeply unsettling. It also has some sapphic undertones, which I appreciated. Now let's get to the movies I actually wanted to talk about. There was a point in my life when I was absolutely obsessed with Japanese horror. Any chance I got, I was watching some random horror movie I found on YouTube, so the movies I'm about to mention might still be on YouTube if you want to check them out for yourself. Noroi, The Curse. I think this movie is still on YouTube, and better yet, it's the extended cut. This is one of my favorite found footage horror movies. The whole thing is presented as a documentary following a paranormal investigator as he looks into a bunch of strange incidents. At first, it feels like you're just watching a series of weird, unrelated events. But as the movie goes on, the pieces slowly start coming together. I also love how committed the movie is to the documentary style. It really feels like you're watching someone trying to put together a mystery rather than a typical horror movie. It's definitely a slow burn, but if you're the kind of person who enjoys creepy atmosphere and unraveling a mystery, I'd highly recommend checking this one out. Occult. This one's from the same director as Noroi, and it's also shot in a found footage style. If I had to pick my favorite Japanese horror movie, it would probably be this one. I don't even want to say too much about it because part of the fun is going in blind. Just know that it starts with an investigation into a strange incident and somehow keeps getting weirder from there. Just watch it. Trust me on this one. Cult. This is another found footage horror movie from the same director behind Noroi and Occult. At this point, if you enjoy one of his movies, you might as well check out the others because they all share that same low-budget documentary-style charm. The story follows a group investigating paranormal activity, and like his other films, it starts off fairly grounded before things gradually get stranger and stranger. Is it as good as Noroi or Occult? Personally, I don't think so, but it's still a fun watch, especially if you're already a fan of his style. Cursed. This one revolves around a strange convenience store, and let me just say this, the owners are creepy as hell. I still remember watching this movie one night because I couldn't sleep. My plan was basically to put on a random horror movie and kill some time. Instead, I ended up getting completely invested in the movie. The weirdest part is that despite being a horror movie, I found it oddly relaxing. Maybe it was the slow pace, maybe it was the atmosphere, I honestly don't know. Which is probably the most backwards way I've ever used a horror movie. This horror movie ended up relaxing me enough to fall asleep. And yeah, I know. The fact that I found a horror movie relaxing probably raises a lot of questions. What can I say? I'm just built different. I don't recommend watching horror movies at night, by the way. Sure, I fell asleep, but the dreams afterwards were less relaxing. Fatal Frame. This is another one that I found oddly comforting. It's a very quiet movie. Even the characters are soft-spoken, which adds to the atmosphere. The movie just lets this calm, eerie feeling hang over everything. I don't know why, but I found myself getting completely absorbed in it. It also has some sapphic undertones, and as someone who enjoys that sort of thing, I was pretty happy about it. I know comforting is a strange word to use for a horror movie, but that's honestly the best way I can describe it. It's creepy, it's atmospheric, and somehow it felt like the horror equivalent of a late-night comfort watch. 13 Real Asian Horror Stories. This one's a collection of horror stories inspired by real events, with 13 different tales packed into one movie. I absolutely love this one. Like with most anthologies, some stories are stronger than others, but the very first story alone made the movie worth watching for me. POV, A Cursed Film. This one starts with a TV show segment about ghost videos. Things quickly go wrong, and the investigation eventually leads to a high school where a group armed with camcorders tries to figure out what's actually going on. I remember stumbling across this one on YouTube years ago, where it was uploaded under the title The Perspective. Last time I checked, it was split into multiple parts. If it's still up, I'd recommend watching it while you still can. It's not a movie I hear people talk about very often, which is a shame because it's a pretty fun found footage horror film, especially if you're already a fan of movies like Noroi, Occult, and Cult. Tales of Terror movies. These are basically collections of short ghost stories bundled together into a full movie. They're perfect if you're not in the mood to commit to one long story and just want a bunch of creepy tales back to back. Like any anthology, some segments will work better for you than others, but that's part of the fun. If one story doesn't land, another one is usually right around the corner. Gannibal. This is a TV series with 2 seasons, and if you enjoy rural horror and small town mysteries, I definitely recommend checking it out. The story follows a police officer who moves to a remote village with his family after a traumatic incident. At first, the village seems quiet and welcoming, but it quickly becomes clear that something is very, very wrong. The atmosphere is fantastic. The mystery kept me hooked, and every time I thought I had figured out what was going on, the show gave me another reason to doubt myself. If you're in the mood for something creepy, tense, and incredibly bingeable, this one is absolutely worth watching. Lastly, let's end things on a non-scary note, one cut of the dead, and please, whatever you do, don't look up spoilers, just trust me on this. When you start watching it, you're probably going to think, why did this random person on YouTube recommend this movie to me? The acting feels amateur. The movie looks low budget. You might even be tempted to turn it off, but please stick with it. Everything is happening for a reason. Just make it through the first 37 minutes and I promise you'll understand why people love this movie so much. Even if you don't like horror movies, you can still watch this one. You don't need to wait until daytime. You don't need to watch it with friends. You can watch it completely alone, because despite the title and the zombie premise, this isn't really a scary movie. It's a wholesome, feel-good movie that genuinely left me smiling by the end. So if horror isn't usually your thing, this is probably the safest recommendation on this entire list. And that's it for my Japanese horror recommendations. There are definitely more movies I could have included, but otherwise we'd be here for 3 hours, and I'd end up recommending half of Japan's horror catalog. If you've seen any of these movies, let me know what you thought of them. And if you have any recommendations of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm always looking for new ways to traumatize myself. Anyway, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go stare suspiciously at the pile of clothes on my chair. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.